Well, welcome to the Crossing Ball. Today I'm going to be looking at some discussions on, on a principle known as omnism. Evidently, omnism is belief that no religion is truth, but that truth is found in them all. So, to kind of stretch that out or try to parse that out, it just simply means that that not one particular religion is true, or that all truth will be found in one specific religion, but truth is found in them all, and that you can sort of glean from each religion truth. Just not all of them have the entirety of truth, kind of like a puzzle, let's say Buddhism has one puzzle and we put that in this piece, Christianity has one, Islam has another, and so forth. And someone had posted this picture in an atheist, theist, deism, and all, the different isms debate group on Facebook, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to kind of look at the comments section and see what some people have said about this. It seems to be a pretty reasonable sort of claim that you can look at all the religions and find some truth in them. This omnism may be a stronger claim in saying that it's not that you can find some truth, but a religion its entirety of its claims or dogmas are truthful. It's just it only has partial truth in terms of all the truth that one needs to know about maybe reality, or at least the spiritual dimension of reality, not necessarily talking about physical reality. So let's look at some of the comments that we have. Okay, so here's one of the first comments. It says, "No, I'm an atheist. Interestingly, this can be found to an extent in Hinduism. Epistemologically, I think this is complete nonsense. It's less sensical than even most religions. However, humanistically speaking, if someone is an omnist, then I'm guessing they are probably pretty tolerant of other people's beliefs or lack of beliefs, and they probably pick and choose elements of morality, applying standards of humanism rather than all or nothing approach, like many theists do with their holy books. So an omnist, for instance, is probably not a homophobic bigot like many theists tend to be. So yeah, if I had to choose between an omnist and your average theist, and especially monotheist, I would probably I'd choose the omnist." So what they seem to be saying is that an omnist is definitely better than someone who is within a particular religious tradition, but it says epistemologically, I think this is complete nonsense. And he says humanistically speaking, if someone is an omnist, then I'm guessing they're probably okay. So I don't know why they said this. I'm just going to guess here, but I'm thinking that because he says right here, they probably pick and choose elements of morality, applying standards of humanism. So typically in atheist circles, one of the main tenets of those who are atheists, or I should say, one of the elements of ethics that they adopt is humanism. And many of them, many atheists are humanists. And what they'll simply say is that humanism is obviously better than embracing any dogma or mythological religion or whatever, because it extracts from, or it basically boils down a lot of the main, what they would call rational conclusions that religions come to, which is, you should treat others as you would like to be treated, you should value others, and things like that. Just really simple, basic ethical and moral tenets, but without the assumptions about God, which they think that assumptions about God actually encourage one to do many bad things, because God tells them to kill lots of people. God tells them that if they do this or that, they will spend eternity with God. So their perspective is that humanism is better because it doesn't have all these hang-ups, and you might as well just be human. Might as well just be a humanist. Obviously, the counter to that is humanism simply an outcropping of Christianity or the Western Judeo-Christian tradition? And that is a very interesting point to make, because a lot of atheists obviously come from a Western tradition, and the Western tradition stems from or bases from the idea that humans have intrinsic value. We're valuable. Obviously, they don't go as far as to say that we're valuable because we were created by God. We're just simply valuable. As to why we're valuable, well, that's kind of a mixed bag. Obviously, they might appeal to some utilitarian concepts of causing less pain. I don't know what that has to do with value, and they may not even use terms like value. They might use just, that you should treat someone as you would like to be treated because of reasons. I don't want to really get it. I don't have anyone that's atheist I'm talking to right now, so I'm not going to get into their perspective. But it suffices to say that there's some flaws with thinking that humanism is superior to any specific religious tradition, especially Christianity and Judaism, because obviously Western humanism did not emerge out of a vacuum, and it emerged, whether you like to admit it or not, historically from a religious tradition. So even though a lot of atheists may say, well, I'm not religious at all, a lot of their perspectives and ideas stem from a Western tradition, and a Western tradition is by default, religious tradition. So here's another. Are you an omnist? I think this is a reply to that atheist. Are you an omnist? If anybody here is, do you believe that need the religions of the world in any way to discover existential, historical, scientific, or moral truths? Because I'll say this, if you were to pick and choose what you like and discard the rest, I'm guessing there's at least one singular principle. Okay, so this person seems to be kind of relaying what I basically said in a nutshell, except kind of going about it in a roundabout way. So I'm not going to touch it. So let's look at another comment about omnism that maybe some people made. Okay, pointless either way. Nobody needs a religion to have the truth. Okay, that's just kind of a blanket statement. They don't really back it up with any claims other than, I think it's pointless either way. Okay, that's your opinion, man. Okay, what's the truth? Person responds, of course, the famous quid est veritas. And the same individual comes back with, truth is the state of being in accordance with facts and reality. And to get that, we must have real testable evidence. So it would be the opposite of the words faith and belief. So stop right there. It says faith and belief. As far as faith and belief in religion, a lot of religious traditions look at the term faith and belief not as faith and belief in a claim, but faith and belief in terms of the word trust. You're trusting a person. So if you embrace the view that reality stems from some sort of personhood, because we're people. So if we're people, we came from a person or persons. And that person or persons would be God. So assuming that reality at base is personable from a phenomenological perspective, without reducing reality to mechanistic causes and attributing reality personable causes or personable features, faith and belief would be trust. So you would be trusting, as I trust in another person, as I trust in a friend or trust in a spouse. So in this instance, faith and belief is not just believing a claim or a statement based on, just to believe because someone told me, without reason, but that I trust or believe in the character of someone, not someone telling me something, but in the nature of things, the natural order of things, that everything's going to be okay in the end because I have a religious or spiritual experience that reminds me, that reassures me that good is more fundamental than evil, or what have you. So just to point that out, faith and belief in a religious perspective, or from a religious perspective, is not necessarily just, in fact, I would argue it at all is just believing a statement because you've been told or you've been conditioned through religious traditions to believe that. Okay, so they go on to say, so the opposite of truth would be an unproven, illogical belief that magic, Allah made a, I don't know why they reduce it to Allah, maybe they assume this person's Muslim. Allah made a whole universe out of nothing, or the Bible God, he says, or the Bible God made people out of dirt and rib bones, or Brahma bursting forth from a cosmic egg to spread the heavens wide with his mighty power. Yet we have almost 5 billion people who choose to have blind faith in such wild stories rather than seek that truth that is in accordance with reality. Why? Because of a powerful hidden brain chemistry. Hold on, let me, I have the rest of it right here. No, I don't think that's it. Hold on. Where's the rest of that? Maybe this is it. Yeah. Because of a powerful hidden brain chemistry. Religion, businesses, I guess he was supposed to say religious businesses, take advantage of well-known hidden human emotional and psychological needs to fabricate a magic higher power father. Well, I mean, businesses appeal to people's emotions regardless, whether it's in a religious or any other psychological perspective. So that's kind of unfair to only talk about religious businesses. Most businesses aren't religious. But anyways, psychological needs to fabricate a magic higher power father figure to watch over them, love them, guide them, give them strength in times of trouble, and to bless them sometimes. And the mighty power of belief soon creates a mental addiction to the beliefs that keep the people dependent for comfort and hope, and keeps them coming back to put cash on collection plates, to hear the comforting stories, and through herd mentality reinforce their beliefs. Does that help them show the difference between truth backed up with good evidence compared to believing supernatural stories on faith? There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, he's jumping around from a variety of different arguments. One argument, which I'll just kind of address briefly, is the famous what they call the Freudian argument, which is the idea that the idea of God developed or emerged as a psychological healing mechanism within the psyche in order to help individuals when they are feeling sort of, lost in the world. They come into an existential crisis. They are self-reflective, and they look at their current situation and they see that it seems hopeless. So they, out of that, create a father figure from their own past experiences. As a child, we have fathers, and our fathers sort of take care of everything for us. It's quite common in psychological theories to suggest that when someone is stressed or experiencing anxiety, higher levels of anxiety and stress that they're normally accustomed to, they'll revert back to a prior developmental stage. Typically, like if someone's afraid of marriage, they'll revert to adolescence when they're, running around and drinking beer and flirting with women. If it's something more serious, like you're afraid that you're going to die, as a lot of children feel that way because they're in very precarious situations. They see a car coming at them down the road. There's a monster under their bed, whatever. They'll revert back to asking for their father or mother. Typically, of course, in this sense, it's the father, and because God is seen as a male figure. So the Freudian argument against God is that God is nothing more than a sort of psychological fabrication of the imagination in order to because humans revert back to a childlike state due to these existential crises that they face themselves with, i.e. impending death, and they'll just revert back to their fathers. Of course, the main problem with this argument is that it assumes that someone would create a cosmic God instead of just saying, "Oh, Daddy." So this also fails to recognize the idea that God, or the idea of God, has many different features to it. It's not just a helper God. It's also an awe-inspiring God. It's also the idea of recognizing gratitude, or even recognizing fear because you're in a terrorist-induced situation and you feel that you have to, invoke some sort of God. So it doesn't really work because it only sees one side of why people believe in God. People don't believe in God just to save their asses from impending doom. So that fails in that sense because it only addresses one side. So, but aside from that, another thing that this person seems to be suggesting, let's look over this, is that that there's a distinction between objective truth, which is recognized and which is parsed out and concluded through, or the conclusions come through, scientific evidence. So they're pitting scientific evidence when you're testing, testing theories, testing, the functions of physical objects in your purview of sensation and perception, with spiritual truths, which is kind of unfair because human experiences are much more, it's completely unfair actually. It's quite false because it reduces all human experience to objective experience, and it's just simply not true. Humans have a panoply of different types of experiences. When I'm feeling the sensation of love, and when I experience love, I don't sit there and try to track the statistical or make a statistical analysis on whether this love is genuine or not. Love functions on a different level. It's not something that's quantifiable, it's qualifiable. So this would fall under the purview of our subjective aspects of experience. Spirituality is a subjective experience. Now, when we say subjective, oftentimes that's seen as somehow lessening the ontological legitimacy of those experiences, but it shouldn't. Just because something's subjective, just something's inner or inward. Just because something is not something that we're experiences with our senses, doesn't mean that it's not real. Obviously, if you want to get into some really deep philosophical arguments, one could say that all of reality is just in our head and not just subjective. From a Kantian perspective, that's very easy to do. And Kant has, as of yet, as I know, has not been contradicted in that sense. Obviously, he's been criticized. You can read Fichte and many other subsequent philosophers who have criticized his view on the distinction between the noumenal and the phenomenal, and those criticisms are very quite authentic. Or I should say, they're accurate. They're accurate criticisms. However, they still do not, dispose of or ignore the distinction of well, I should say the problem of mentalism, which is the idea that you can't get any of this outside of your head. That's why Fichte had suggested, well, why do we even make these distinctions? And in fact, Fichte would probably agree with me in saying these subjective experiences are just nothing more than personal experiences. Instead of calling them subjective in the sense that they're just in my head, we should just call them personal experiences. And personal is no less objective than physical experiences. It's just the difference is that we experience it in a different way. We feel it as opposed to see it, and it just has different features to it. But it's just as real as what we would call physical world. So what this person here is pitting objective truth against spiritual truths, basically. When I said subjective, I was using that in the same sense as spiritual truths. Here, let me bring these up. Okay, so a good way of showing this is looking at Scripture, for example. So in Matthew 5, we have the Beatitudes. We have Jesus is speaking to a crowd on a mountainside with his disciples, and he taught a large multitude of people these truths. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So he's basically saying that you need to be poor in spirit. And what that means is you need to not be full of yourself, be humble in this. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. In other words, be genuine with your feelings of when you see something sad. Don't dismiss it, but be honest about it, and they'll be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Meek, obviously, are kind of a form of humility, being just sort of gentle, meek, gentle, humble, not being puffed up. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. That's someone who really wants to do the right thing, someone who really wants to be good, someone who really wants to try their best. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Now, these, in contrast to what this individual was saying, these don't come off as mythological. These are just spiritual truths that Jesus is expressing. Now, when the Bible talks about physical events, that's where we have a problem. But it's not a problem if you read the Bible symbolically or allegorically. It is a problem if you look at everything through the lens of a literalism. And I think most of these atheists on these, not all atheists obviously, but a lot of the atheists that I experience on these websites are like this. They'll take everything in the Bible literally. So it says, thus heaven and earth were completely and all the rest ready. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested all his work. So they're just taking, hold on, let me go down. Okay, so he said, but let's see, where was he at? Where is it at? Lord planted. Okay, now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. The Lord God made all kinds of trees to grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food in the middle of the garden. Now, this is interesting. Okay, we're talking about a tree in a garden in a place called Eden. Now, is this a literal place? Is Eden a literal place? Now, the atheist would say, when they read this, yeah, that's what the book is telling me. It's a literal place. But that's an interpretation. That's a literal interpretation of what we're reading here. What we're reading here is a physical, heuristic explanation of spiritual truths. Let me say that again. This is a physical, heuristic interpretation of a physical interpretation of a spiritual truth. It's modelic. It's a model. Now, we see these in science all the time. We see models all the time. For instance, and I've mentioned this before, look at an atom. How are atoms described, particularly to laymen, people that aren't physicists, people who aren't mathematicians, particularly mathematicians that are interested in engineering. when we think of an atom, we think of these little shiny balls that are stuck together by some magical force, and they are held together. Is that what really an atom is? No, not at all. But in order for us to understand what they are, sometimes explanations have to give a faulty or I wouldn't say misleading, an inaccurate description so that the human mind can understand. This right here is an inaccurate description that we see in the Bible of a real spiritual truth that, in order for humans to understand, has to be expressed in these terms. Now, many of these atheists don't understand this. They obviously read the Bible literally. And when you read the Bible literally, you come up with these crazy interpretations. Let's see. So let's look at types of forces. Gravitational force. Gravitational force is a force that attracts any two objects with mass. See those terms, like attracts? What's that mean, attracts? Does it have like a romantic attraction? It pulls it to it. Like, why does it pull it to it? We have to use language to help us understand what is physically going on. Now, in science, they use language to help the individual, and also the scientist uses this language too, to help them understand the phenomena better. It's no different than in religious texts. There are models and there are heuristic expressions that are used in order to help an individual understand what's going on spiritually. The same way with this. So it's a false claim to, it's a false dichotomy, I should say, to pit spiritual truths against scientific truths. So when an individual says they only accept truth that is objective, I think this guy said that. He said, let me go back to it. He said somewhere. No, where's it at? I can't find it right now. I had it up there. But basically, when he said let's see if that's up here. When he said it backed up with good evidence compared to believing supernatural stories on faith. Again, going back to the word faith, as I was explaining earlier, the word faith is trust. You trust in a person. I'm sure this person puts a lot of trust in other individuals all the time. Does that mean that this person is an idiot? No. It just means that when you're talking about people, you trust them. I don't trust physical, mechanistic systems, but I trust people. So on a different level of, varying levels of analysis of different various phenomena in my purview of experience, or in other words, in reality, or in other words, in my life, I have different ways of understanding. Now, one way of understanding things is through this sort of trial and error, where I test things. And these things are physical objects which behave by specific laws, and these laws are understood through this process of testing and retesting and observing the difference, the consequences, the reactions from these tests, and coming up with conclusions. That's the scientific method. But not all things in reality function that way. And to say that all things in reality function that way goes against, I'm sure, the way this person lives their life. I'm sure that they don't assume that their spouse is an individual they can test, that they can observe the person's behavior and then make conclusions based on those observations. We could get into observing individuals in groups as opposed to individuals individually. But ultimately, everyone bases faith and trust in the individual as opposed to these using the scientific method to understand another person. So I think that was a terrible answer. I would not agree with it at all. Okay, so here's some other ones. They can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. They can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. Well, I mean, I guess that's like your opinion, man. I don't know what to really say to that. He didn't really back it up with any evidence. He just said they can't all be right. Why can't they all be right? He's probably saying that because they make what he sees as contradictory claims. One religion says God's like this. Another religion says God's like that. Well, so what? In different cultures, they have a different word they have a different word for elephant, and they have different uses for elephant. Doesn't mean it's a different species. Maybe even some of the attributes they use are different. In Islam, they talk about God as being one. Christianity, they talk about him as being in three persons. They both argue about that. Does that mean that they're both wrong? Not necessarily. They could both be right. God could be one, but could be expressed in three persons. Regardless of how much they argue about it in both religious traditions, one says they're right, the other one says they're right, they could technically both be right. Buddhism could be right as well. The idea that we must get rid of our desires in order to be one with the cosmos, in a sense. That's a horrible, it's a terrible description of Buddhism. Sorry for that really dumbed down version, but essentially something like that. So it's more of a philosophy than what you would see as a traditional religion, but it is a religion. It has various it's a system of belief. So the other person says, I don't identify as one, but I agree that all religions are scratching at reality and getting at a bit each. So yeah, that's good. I like that. That's not a strong statement of the omnism, but it's a it's a weak statement, but at least it's kind of acknowledging that you can find truth in all of them. And this person says, it depends. I mean, there is a positive answer if you take omnism as no one has the truth, but each religion's I'm assuming religious tradition can't be a complete set of wrong statements, so everyone must hold a part of the truth. The big problem is religions contradict each other in many fields. So how can we say which one holds the truth in that particular field? And I kind of answered that when I said that each religious tradition does have what seems to be contradictory claims, but those contradictory claims are merely just different facets of a much larger thing that it's describing, namely God. So if God is infinite, God would have a lot of features that one experiences, particularly culturally. One person in a particular culture might have different types of experiences of God, but there would probably be some commonality. Obviously, and if somebody's open-minded enough to look at those commonalities, I think that they would find them, as opposed to being such a contrarian as a lot of these atheists seem to be, which is just really annoying. Let's see, that was the same one. Let me look at this one right here. We just went over that one. I do agree. I just don't think these things are exclusive to the religions. Why not? Okay, this is, I don't know if I read this, I'm not sure, but I like it. I do agree that you can probably find good things in all religions. I just don't think those good things are exclusive to the religions. Why not take the good stuff and get rid of the fairy tales and myths? Okay, well, the fairy tales and myths, I see what they're saying, and this is a common criticism, obviously, of religion, particularly in many atheist circles, particularly new atheists, that you can, they would obviously say that a lot of the moral and ethical principles that you derive from biblical texts, you can derive logically, just by, rationally, which I would certainly not agree with that, because the values of our culture are based from a religious tradition. So the fact that mankind, are seen as valuable has a lot to do with our religious tradition. And if you take the religious tradition away from that, you may not see humans as being very valuable. So I think humanism is predicated upon the religious tradition in which it finds itself. So kind of shooting itself in its foot. But anyways, it says, why take the good stuff and get rid of the fairy tales? So even if you were to assume that we need a religious tradition to have humanism, why not just take the supernatural aspects out of that religious tradition, which was pretty common. A lot of deists, particularly the 18th and early 19th century deists, saw it that way. They wanted to look at God as kind of a first principle, Aristotelian first principle. But as far as miracles, things that we read in the Bible that certainly suggest supernatural events, they want to take those out. But the problem with taking them out is that they relay, well, the supernatural elements to them relay narratives that contribute to the larger narrative as a whole, or the larger spiritual story as a whole. So if you take out, let's say, the resurrection of Christ, you lose the kind of the relevance to why mankind longs to live forever. You know, if you were to take out the resurrection, you take away the hope that that humanity has some sort of eternal aspect to it, because the resurrection is an event which suggests that Jesus, being the Son of God, was able to was able to conquer death, and by conquering death through by the power of God, on behalf of humanity, was able to secure an eternal life for us. If you take that away, then you really don't have the most important aspect, or one of the most important aspects of the Bible, which is the fact that it teaches that we have an eternal aspect to us, our souls. So that, you take that away, I think that it loses its fervor, I think. So I like some of what they said, but I would disagree with that. Further, so we can find something good in all religions? Well, yes, I suppose that's true. I mean, even Hitler got the Autobahn built, and that's a good thing, right? But it's not the few good things they bring that frighten us, is it? Yeah, this person seems to be suggesting that that religion did, I mean, at least admitting from a historical perspective that religion, particularly Christianity, Judeo-Christian, the Judeo-Christian tradition brought forth many good things, but it brought so many bad things. I'd imagine they'd probably bring up like the wars and the killing of heretics and the oppression by the church and state and all this sort of thing. So what they're saying is that that's necessarily nested in religion as a whole, and it's not. It's more nested in the nature of politics. So this person is confusing socio-political tension with religion. Obviously, as you know, this didn't really become an issue until the state and the church merged, which was once the Roman Empire embraced Christianity and began to codify it into its law. Started making laws that were based from religious, or from Christianity and Christian traditions, or newly made Christian traditions, which should only be a couple hundred years old. But anyways, that is a false sort of amalgamate. It's a faulty sort of, God, I can't think of the word. Bringing those two together, bringing those two together, which is the socio-political aspects and the religious aspects. It's not the religion basically that brought forth all of those bad things. It was the political structure, and we're always going to have that. Not saying that we can't do better. Not saying that that certain dogmatism about certain religious principles had nothing to do with it. Obviously, it did, but they in and of themselves were not the causes. It was the political institutions. Let's see, metaphorical truth. Maybe, but I'm not content to rely on metaphorical truths. I like precision. And the cosmos is all there is, was, and ever shall be. It is therefore God. Oh, this is probably a fundy. I'm assuming they're fundy. They're probably, this is someone who wants to look at religious tradition as being special revelation, and that God is giving his people, people on earth, his creation, a clear and concise revelation of who he is through the Bible. This, I could go on about this. I'm not really going to go on. That's not really the purpose of this discussion right now. As far as theology, I mean, I could definitely go that way, but I don't really want to address that right now. Okay, so another comment. You had me in the first half. Not gonna lie, I don't know what the heck that was about. Let's see if there's any more comments. Okay, that was the one I just read. I read this one. So ultimately, going back to the omnism, I like the idea. I think it's pretty neat. I tend to be a little bit more of a inclusivist, though. Inclusivism is the idea that, and particularly in Christianity, that it is through Christ, that we are saved through Christ, but it's not through what we think. It's only through Christ himself. In other words, it doesn't matter what you believe, but it does matter what you embrace in terms of goodness. God, that's a terrible statement. let me rethink what I said. Oh gosh, it's tough to unpack. Let's see, inclusivism. Let me try to make this as clear as possible. Inclusivism is the idea that it's only through Jesus that we're all saved. Okay, but that salvation is basically based from him. It's his actions and not our actions. So the exclusivist would say you have to believe a certain set of principles and claims about Jesus in order to be saved. Inclusivist says no. You could be a Buddhist, you could be an atheist, whatever, but your actions are kind of representative of what God has revealed to you in his heart, in your heart. And even though you can express it, it's still there. So in other words, the atheist, through humanism, would be doing the will of God or the will of Christ, even though they don't think it's Christ. That's the reality of it. I mean, if I were to look at a tree and I would call it a tree, and someone else say, no, that's a boot. It doesn't matter what they call it. Rose by any other name, still a rose. So the atheist, even though he wants to call it reason, or even wants to call it rational thinking, it's still Christ. It's still Christ revealed into his heart, even though he's misinterpreting it. So that would be inclusive. And of course, the last one, I think the omnism in this perspective is probably relativism, or the idea that that people are saved regardless of what path, or all are saved based on any path that they're going, just as long as they're doing the right thing. Which, that's an interesting perspective. But basically, that would suggest that it's in virtue of atheism, or it's in virtue of, Hinduism or Buddhism that they're saved. And I would disagree. I think it is Christ. But I think when Christ revealed himself to different cultures, maybe they call it something else. There was an interesting theologian that had suggested that, an ancient theologian, I think it was Clement from Alexandria, he had suggested that Plato, Socrates actually, was kind of a Jesus to the Greeks, because I'm not saying he was Jesus, obviously, but he was a revelation of God to the Greeks. The Jews were revealed the law. They were given the law, through Moses. Well, let me turn that back. No, he wasn't comparing Socrates to Jesus. He was comparing Socrates to kind of like Moses, where the Jews had Moses. Moses was the lawgiver, and God had revealed to the Jews God's law. But to the Greeks, he revealed his intellect or his rationale or his philosophical wisdom. And we see that in Socrates. So from many Eastern perspectives, particularly the Alexandrian school, Platonism or Neoplatonism was an extension of Christianity. Christ's truths were revealed before Christ, obviously. It was the Logos, through these principles of Platonic thought. Some could even say Aristotelian, even though Aristotelian is a little bit more earthy, a little bit more, substantive, concrete, as opposed to Plato, which was more airy and more formal. Had the forms and shadowy and everything like that. But ultimately, I think that this omnism's a pretty good thing. I think that when it was introduced in this atheist room, there wasn't as much, I guess, arguing about it as there typically is when just somebody sort of shit posts about Christ. They'll say, if you don't believe in Christ, you're going to hell. That obviously triggers atheists even more. And on the other end, when you have atheists that shit post and they put something about how if you're religious, you're dumb, or I can't believe you believe in a talking snake and a zombie that walks through walls and comes back from that was hung on the cross and is like a zombie now, or why I forget what type of undead creature they call him. I think some other creature other than zombie, but essentially they just sort of explain or sort of reduce Jesus to a zombie. So that is obviously a straw man as well, and that's just shit posting, and that triggers a lot of particularly evangelicals because they're really funny about their doctrine. They believe that if you have to believe a certain thing, you have to believe that Jesus was this, that, and that, and if you don't, then you're burning in hell. So I like to see posts like this. I like seeing some sort of commonality. I like seeing people work together, and I prefer that. I don't like to see arguing. I don't like to see debates. I mean, some things we should debate about, obviously. I think it's important to debate. I think it's important to clarify thought, but by the same token, I think it's really bad when we get gridlocked in just yelling at each other when there's a lot of things that we agree on. I mean, we agree that we need to make the world a better place. We need to fight for a little bit fairness. We need to make life less miserable, and things like that. So we all agree that we should love one another more. We should care for one another more. It's just what that entails, obviously, is where we differ. The atheist sees that as just a rational perspective. Christian would see that as the fullness of Christ. That's what Christ is love, and Christ reveals that to us on earth through the Holy Spirit, and that revealing the will of God. But in either case, I think that I like to see these sort of areas where a lot of people agree. Well, that's it for this episode, but I hope you tune in for next time. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about next time. I kind of threw this together, and you can tell I was kind of stumbling around my words because I had nothing prepared. Typically, I don't. I just look up a bunch of, a bunch of interactions on these Facebook groups where people argue, particularly religious people and atheists, and I think it's interesting. I like to look through it, and I like to parse out some of the problems with these arguments and some of the strengths of these arguments too. So, well, until next time, you have a good one.